So in this video, what I want to do is just to introduce you briefly on how to generate and sculpt a terrain asset in Unity. The Unity 4 Fundamentals book contains a lot more information on this subject, so I recommend that you watch this video alongside with the book, as I recommend for all of the videos. So to quickly generate a terrain, we can move up here to the menu and choose Terrain and Create Terrain. Now as soon as I select this, right away in the viewport you can see that we've got a terrain mesh. I'm just going to double click on that in the hierarchy panel, and you can see that we've got a terrain mesh in the scene. Now by default this is actually quite large. If I choose terrain and set resolution, you can see that by default it's set the width and height, the length, to 2000, which is very large indeed. So I'm going to just reduce this size to 256 by 256. I'm going to leave all of these other settings at their default and choose set resolution. And now I'm going to frame this object in the scene. Again, we've shrunk down this mesh, but it is still quite large. If we were to drag and drop a first-person controller on this, we would get an appreciation of just how large this was. So to go ahead and start sculpting this terrain, I can move over here to the Object Inspector. Make sure you have the terrain object selected here. And with the Object Inspector open, then ensure you choose this first item here, which is the Raise and Lower brush. We can use this to interactively paint and sculpt the terrain. So I'm going to set my brush settings here to this sort of value, lower the opacity. Choose perhaps this brush, and I can begin just clicking on this terrain to start elevating parts of the terrain. And to lower them, I can hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and begin to lower particular parts. So in this way I can start to paint on different areas of the terrain. We have this third item here, which is the Smooth brush, and I can just come in here and start to smooth out areas of the terrain that were perhaps a little too rough. So I'm going to just smooth over these, and again I'm going to move back to the Raise and Lower, and I can start painting on elevation, hold down Shift to decrease it, and so on and so forth. And in this way we can use these tools combined to interactively sculpt a terrain object. Now it might take quite a while to get it exactly as we want it, but again good results come to those with patience and perseverance. Now once you have sculpted a terrain that you are happy with, the next step of the process, the next thing that you want to do is to usually paint the terrain with a texture to make it look believable, with a rock texture or a grass texture and so on. So to do that I'm going to switch over to this button here, which is the Paint Texture mode, and to access this you have to ensure the terrain object is selected. And to get this to work we have to load in textures. So I'm going to click the Edit Textures button and choose Add Texture from the context menu, and a window appears here which is the Add Terrain Texture. And I'm going to select a texture here. I'm going to choose, say, this grassy texture, and leave these settings just as they are for now and choose Add. And what you can see is suddenly when we do that, the whole of this terrain is painted with this grassy texture. Now we want to change the tiling for this, so I'm going to select the grass texture, choose Edit Textures, click Edit Texture from the menu, and I can adjust the tiling of this. So I can increase it to say 25 by 25, and as I do this in the viewport you can see it changing already. So let's just set this to 60 and see how that goes. Choose Apply, and I think this texture is not looking too bad. But now let's paint on some rocks or some extra features on top of this layer. So to do that I can click the Edit Textures button, choose Add Texture to add an additional texture to the palette, come over here to the Add Terrain Texture dialog, click the Select button, and from this I'm going to choose a grass rock texture like so. I'm going to change the tiling to 70 by 70 and choose Add, and here we have a second texture, but notice that it does not flood fill the terrain as the first texture did. So I'm going to choose a brush now. Let's choose this brush for example, and I can begin to just paint on straight away this selected texture. If I wanted to undo this, I could click the original texture and paint over it, just as I've done with the other texture. So I can switch between them like brushes in a palette, and I can even add additional textures. So I'm just going to stick with these two. I can select the second texture and begin painting the rocky terrain over here, paint a little bit also over here, paint a bit over here, and so on and so forth. And we can add in as many images as we need and paint them onto this terrain texture. So that's how we can go about painting terrain textures.